high atop Caesar Rodney Square in beautiful downtown Wilmington, Delaware.
We are
the Podcast Pediatricians.
I'm Rob Walter.
And I'm Matt Gotthold. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Podbay, and podcastpediatricians.com.
So much to talk about, Matt, but first of all, Lashana Tova, Mordechai, year 5783. Can you believe it? Did you have an easy fast? Did you atone for your sins, such as wearing red Crocs like today?
I do have many a sin to atone for, and thanks for translating that for me, but red Crocs are not one of them. I consider them a blessing.
Not for us. And have you ever fasted?
I have fasted, but being a Catholic, I generally restrict it to things like Good Friday and Ash Wednesday.
I thought you just eat fish all day.
Well, that's another. Well, we have options as Catholics.
Okay, so what am I wearing right now, Matt?
You are wearing your Phillies jersey, Utley, representing. You know why?
Mm-hmm. Why? Because
they're about to close out this series against the Atlanta Braves.
We're taping this, so by the time you hear it, either we'll be like, yep, or be like, they were such idiots because the Phillies blew it. And we're actually doing this while the game is on, so quite dedication. We're both on call. Both ruing how we hate being on call. Yes.
Yes.
Can't wait to
I don't
stop
rue that I
being
hate being on call. I embrace
Right.
that I hate being on call.
I got to give a shout out, because you know her too, to Jamie Wolhagen.
Yes.
The optometrist extraordinaire at Delaware Ophthalmology Groups.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of her kids. And when I told her that this weekend we were losing power all weekend because of some landlord thing, she's like, why don't you come to my office? And the ophthalmologist there said, go. So we've been in the ophthalmology office today.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, they have much nicer digs
Stuff
than we
than
do.
we do, yeah.
And the toys they have. Mm-hmm. You know, my nightmare is some kid's going to like snap off one of those toys in the room and it's going to be horrible. So we're being very, very careful. But it's nice. Our community of caregivers kind of looking out for each other. As we make fun of each other, but as we do too. And it's been a minute since our last podcast back in June. We both went to the Hot Topics Disney meeting in July. Of course, Matt kept up his streak of never going to the parks, while I had a magical time at the Magic Kingdom with Susan and at Universal and Harry Potter World. But did you enjoy yourself, Maddie? Did you have a great meeting?
I did. My lovely wife, Diana, came with me this year, and we really just kind of chilled out. Yeah, we went out for some dinners. We had some very nice meals and explored the area without, thankfully, needing to step foot in that seventh circle of hell that you call the parks.
You know, we're planning for next year, Hot Topics Disney World at Grand Floridian. Sign up. We'd love to see you. It's going to be big talks on infectious disease and genetics with a hot controversy of should every baby get whole exome genetic sequencing, because that's going to be the future, as we'll talk about in a second. And also a talk on sports medicine with our good friend Brad Bly, including should young children specialize in sports. As Matt would say, only if they're going to end up making millions of dollars, so you can retire early on your kids' earnings.
I never said that.
But Maddie, do you know what a Golden Gap Pass is?
No idea.
Oh, well, a Golden Gap Pass, when you flash it, gets you escorted in the front of every ride at Universal to the front seat, no lines, and you can immediately repeat the ride again if you want. They call a special attendant to escort you there to get these rides. I think this pass is either for celebrities or for people who are greatly disabled. So every time I flashed my pass, first of all, there was a look of disappointment because I'm not a celebrity, and then revulsion because obviously I was able-bodied.
Jumping the line.
And I was jumping the line.
Nice.
But, I didn't care. It was like being Charlie from, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I had the golden ticket. Free candy in the candy store. I hit every ride hard, especially every roller coaster. It was great. I did it over and over again, except about 2 hours later when I realized that I'm not a kid in a candy store. I'm a 61-year-old guy who went on roller coasters all day without a break. I was fuzzy. I had a bit of a headache. I was dizzy, but no regrets. I'll never go back to that park again without that pass because it was amazing.
Can I be your Grandpa Joe, Charlie?
And you and Grandma could be in the same bed together with your
that would be nice.
Makatono. Yeah. So, any new movies this summer, Matt? TV shows, concerts?
Let me see here. I was kind of coerced into seeing the new Top Gun movie, and it met my expectations, which were that it was going to be pretty much the same as the first one.
Right. I have boycotted Tom Cruise.
Have you? Yes.
Ever since the whole postpartum depression doesn't exist thing he did. So I haven't gone to any. But
he is kind of kooky.
He is. But then I had to see it. I watched the first movie first, so it was entertaining.
Yeah. I think entertaining is
It was
well
the
said.
summer movie.
Yeah.
I want to see Bros, the movie, with my guy, Billy. Billy Eichner.
Billy on the street guy?
Hey,
I only know that because I think you've mentioned him.
Yeah. And then the TV show The Bear, about this real place in Chicago. I used to live near there.
I've heard of it.
Cooking,
Chef, right?
Chef. It's amazing. And Abbott Elementary.
I hear that's good.
It's Philly.
I don't watch TV.
It's Philly. In fact, the opening season this year, the first season, the guest star, was Gritty.
Nice.
Yes. So if you're a pediatric caregiver, you should watch Abbott Elementary. But
I'll do my
my
best.
other question is, how's floating going? I hear that.
Oh my goodness gracious! So I've just got to tell you, I consider it to be like my altered state. So just to get in that saline tank and 16 inches of hypersalinated water, pitch black, no sound, and just relax. And it takes me all kinds of neat places in my head. At least that's what I tell people. I think I usually fall asleep, but I really find it to be an incredible experience. So I try to do it once a month, and my son likes it as well. So when he comes home, we do it as well. So I end up doing
it. Are you
it
together, or they're separate pools?
That would be creepy, man.
Yeah, it would be. I don't know how it works. I've never done the float. Is it called just floating?
Floating, yeah. So so there are presumably places all over the country. This is the only one that I know of in Delaware. I think there's one in Rehoboth, and I've become actually very friendly with the folks who own it, and am interested in doing it long term. I really have enjoyed it.
Are you going to try to buy a franchise like you usually do? Every time Matt goes on something, he's like, "I want a franchise," and it's always like $2 million.
I'm like, maybe I don't want a franchise.
And Diana's like, "Nope, I don't think you're going to do that."
Matt, if it's more than $1.95, forget about it. No, don't think it hasn't crossed my mind.
I know it has. I know it has.
Yeah, I got to get behind things I believe in, right? I'm not one of those dudes who's going to sell whatever is given to me. Like, can we mention Dr. Oz on this?
Oh, all right. The election's coming up. We don't get too political here, but like,
come on.
I mean,
dude.
we've talked about him before he ever was a politician.
We trashed him before he
us
tried to
as a physician, and now it's embarrassing on all levels. So anybody out there who is in Pennsylvania, please vote. Don't vote for him.
All right, let me see here. So let's get cracking with today's topic or topics. So today we're going to present some highlights from the excellent dermatology talks by Dr. Kashi Oza from NYU. Great talks, great tips, fabulous pearls. And remember, anything we get wrong is on us and not on Dr. Oza.
Not on Kashi.
So, But first, we do feel compelled to read our disclaimer. So, we are sharing our own personal opinions on pediatric care. Always talk to your own pediatric caregiver about your child. Pediatric caregivers should always consult expert guidelines and consider their own community standards of care. Okay, so what's new in the world?
I'll give you something new. The big foosball game we had during our book club last week, and we crushed you, Matthew.
Okay, so as someone who actually does have a foosball table in my basement,
I know you have a foosball table.
I've never used it. It was for my son.
We could tell.
Well, it was weigh wasn't it?
Not that I'm competitive, but
you guys like play a man's game, like pool or something. I know that you try to play poker, but that itself is not
good.
Not good. All right. So what's new? All right. Well, we're now able to vaccinate kids of all ages against COVID, and the new bivalent, more Omicron-specific version is being given. On a separate but related note, there have been over 700 pediatric measles deaths in Zimbabwe, where a combination of immunization delays due to the COVID pandemic and measles vaccine refusals by members of a fundamentalist church have led to a disastrous outbreak. This is heartbreaking, Rob. There's no reason this should happen.
And it's not just like at third world countries. This is the same exact thing that happened in Philly in the measles outbreak in 1991 that was tied to some fundamentalist religious congregations. And the resurgence of measles makes it clear that if we don't stay vigilant and keep vaccination rates up, then children will die. And speaking of vaccines, I do want to do a little bit of a mea culpa. We talked about monkeypox last time, and in retrospect, I think we really overpraised the public health response.
Yeah.
It became clear that they kind of blew it on testing, they blew it on vaccinating, and they blew it on treating. And although the infection with monkeypox is rarely deadly, we did not emphasize enough how painful the lesions can be. Now, testing, vaccinations for at-risk populations, and availability of treatment has been getting better, and the cases have plummeted once all this started, and they're better targeting at-risk groups like sexually active gay adults with ways to reduce risk. But we need to do a better job next time. If this is the first challenge since COVID, we didn't pass the challenge as a medical community. And I do admit, we talked about the new vaccine. I'm wondering what you're going to say, but my pitch for the vaccine at 6 months to 5 years is a little bit more nuanced. We've been talking over and over about how younger kids have an innate immunity. They don't get as sick. They do have a higher rate of ER visits. They do have a higher rate of hospitalizations. There is long COVID, although it's rare. Often the littlest ones are the only people in the extended family who are not vaccinated, which puts everybody at risk. But the uptake of my families wanting to get it has not been that robust. And
No.
I just tell them about it and then I move on.
Yeah, pretty much the same, Rob. I mean, I'm not giving this, the real focus of energy that I think I gave to the vaccine when it came out for the older kids, and there were still plenty of adults who were not immunized and or grandparents who were at risk. So I'll mention it. I just don't seem to be as energized by trying to convince people
Right.
that this is imperative, especially when there are other vaccines due that visit or other things that. So yeah, I mean, on one hand, I feel kind of like a slacker pediatrician, but on the other hand, I've just got to say I'm not that.
Right. They know we
compelled.
support it and we give it, and so
Yeah.
I will talk to them if they want to. But when I get that look, like no way,
Yeah.
I'm not pushing like I did 2 years ago.
Right. No, I think we're in the same place with that.
I mean, we also must mention that the AAP came out with its new breastfeeding guidelines, which support continued breastfeeding up to 2 years of age and beyond. And one of the people who helped do that was Joan Meek, who had talked to one of our meetings, and she's great. But I think when I heard this, I mean, we both strongly support breastfeeding as long as mom wants to breastfeed. But as detailed by your buddy, William Wilkoff in Maine in a recent article, these well-researched recommendations are aimed at pediatricians, but they don't make us more supportive of breastfeeding because we are. But the publicity and headlines about breastfeeding for 2 years or more just will increase the guilt and anxiety of those moms who choose not to breastfeed for a full 2 years or can't breastfeed for a full 2 years. And, it's great. We have moms who sometimes want to go that long, but I think if they go a year, I'm thrilled. And I think they're wonderful moms. So how do you feel about that?
No, I agree. I mean, if I'm first of all, I always tell moms that any amount of breastfeeding you do is good. Right, and you have to do what's right for you and your family. You didn't have a baby to hate the fact that you have to feed them.
And you don't want it to ruin the experience of motherhood. That's not it.
Yeah, you didn't have a baby just so you could breastfeed. Right. On the other hand, as you said, I mean, we both are very dedicated to the idea of helping moms to continue to breastfeed. Should they care to. But yeah, I think the between the lines message here is anytime that something comes out as an official AAP edict, more or less, the between the lines message is, and if you don't do that, then so yeah, I agree with you that it shouldn't be something that's makes you feel bad.
You won't get the reference, but it's like Robin from Game of Thrones. You won't get the reference, but he's like breastfeeding at like 12.
Oh, okay. No, I don't get that reference,
Okay.
but I do remember The Last Emperor.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
All right, so let's talk about some of the highlights of the meeting, starting with the top research papers of the year, as chosen by the conference's moderators, one of whom was my dear friend Rob Walter. So, a randomized trial published in JAMA Pediatrics in 2022 demonstrated that 5 days of antibiotics for a community-acquired pneumonia works even better than 10 days of antibiotics. And don't forget that newer guidelines for uncomplicated unilateral otitis media treatment suggest 7 days of antibiotics for 2 to 5-year-olds and 5 days for those 5 and older.
Again, less can be more.
Less can be more. Unfortunately, 94% of pediatric providers still prescribe 10 days of antibiotics for all otitis media cases, and 40% of us continue to use antibiotics other than amoxicillin as the first-line choice. So we as pediatricians still have a ways to go.
I saw an article recently about how urgent care centers do not give more antibiotics than other physicians.
What?
And I'm like, I don't believe it.
Liar.
I'm sorry. I'll have to see that reproduced, but I don't believe it.
Right.
And thanks to research that Dr. Mike Pichitero and his colleagues published in Pediatrics in May of 2022, we also know that early antibiotic use in young children decreases the immune response to vaccines. So another reason to be mindful of antibiotic stewardship. Also, a few months ago, the CDC and the AAP finally updated the developmental milestones. These milestones now are what 75% of children will reach at that given age, instead of what was previous, which was only 50%. So you could see the consequences immediately in the office that when we start asking questions about developmental milestones, more and more moms saying, yep, doing that, doing that, doing that. And it really is nice, as opposed to almost 50% of the time when the parents like, they're not doing that. It may be normal, but it doesn't make them feel good. Have you noticed these new guidelines that it makes it a little bit more pleasant in the room?
Yeah, and it was always a dilemma, and I think you've alluded to it in conversations we've had when this child is within normal limits, and they're just not checking that box. And I always felt compelled to write something in the EMR but they're almost there, that kind of thing. Yeah. Right. So it has indeed made it a little bit more useful. So next, there were 2 separate concussion studies in JAMA and in JAMA Pediatrics over the last year. In the first study, pediatric concussions in 5 to 18-year-olds were found to increase the risk for a variety of mental health issues, including self-harm, and to significantly increase the rate of subsequent psychiatric hospitalizations. The second study discussed found that refraining from screen use for the first 48 hours after concussion decreased concussion symptom duration by an average of 4 days. It's nice to be able to relay this kind of specific information about screen use immediately following a concussion during a visit for concussion. So, Rob, that for a long time we were very adamant about no screens, no screens, no screens. And then that kind of started to loosen up a little bit, somewhat with the leadership of some of the local concussion experts. But now at least there's something, that is much more researched that seems to be that it's an advantage.
And very specific. Yeah. 48 hours, get off your screens. And then they should continue to get off their screens in their bed anyway, which goes also to that we have to keep reminding patients who suffer concussions that good sleep helps repair and protect their brain. I even push melatonin a few days post-concussion if they can't sleep well after concussion, because if they can sleep, they're repairing their brain. And while we're briefly on the topic of melatonin, it's worth noting that melatonin poisonings and overdoses in children have greatly increased over the past few years. So as with many things, it might be over the counter, but it's still a drug. And you have to be careful. And it's not studied as well because it's over the counter. So it's a catch-22. We quickly also highlighted the JAMA Peds August article about the Boston Baby Seq project. Again, I mentioned that before about doing whole exome sequencing on every single newborn. They're doing that in the NICU and control patients. And they're looking at over 1,000 types of child-onset diseases to screen for with highly actionable adult-onset diseases also. And the goal right now is just to explore future medical, behavioral, economic impacts if we integrate this sequencing into the care of healthy and sick newborns. They estimate if they did every kid whole exome sequencing, you'd reduce the amount of cancer deaths in pediatrics by 10% right there, because you'd pick up some of these genetic-related cancers. Wow. And for better or for worse, this type of information is going to drive the future of pediatrics. And I think we're both kind of happy that we'll be retired by then. But it's conceivable every newborn baby is going to come with a full genetic sequence report. We're going to need a lot of genetic counselors. It's going to change the way we practice.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, the genie's kind of coming out of the bottle, right?
Yep.
And so, yeah, and there are a lot of advantages to this, but there are also a lot of moral dilemmas to this. You know, there are
Right.
decisions that are going to need to be made, or there's just the perception that, oh my goodness, like so much of life is dependent on things like hope. And if you're telling me this, my child has this condition that we
Right.
don't have any way to treat, that's golly, that's a miserable way to live.
I think the best example in our medical career is things like Huntington's disease.
Yes,
If
yes.
a parent has it, 50% of their kids will have it, and they can get tested for the gene and know that as they get older, they're going to
Deteriorate.
greatly. And do you want to know that? And so then young people are allowed to make that choice, but it's a horrible, horrible choice.
It's the old is ignorance really bliss?
Right.
And sometimes it is. So next, Robbo, it would benefit you to know your surgeon's birthday. So a British Medical Journal article noted that the mortality rate in adults in the hours after emergency surgery increases if it is the surgeon's birthday.
Huh.
Thankfully, a 2022 JAMA Internal Medicine article found no drop-off in surgical results or in a surgeon's performance if an emergency surgery is done in the middle of the night or when the surgeon is sleep-deprived in general. Whew, thank you, coffee. I'm sure they inhale that stuff.
Do you think we have a drop-off when we're called in the middle of the night on call?
I am certain we do drop.
Or is there no drop-off possible?
It depends on the way you look at that one, right? Either we're so stellar or we're so terrible.
Exactly.
There's no difference.
Either
right?
way, either way.
Yeah.
But you know, in talking about the increased mortality rate when a surgeon's on call, I would have to think that you have to be pretty bad mood if you're a surgeon and they put you on call on your birthday. You know, maybe to say, all right, I'll go out to dinner because maybe I won't get called and you stay up late. So, but I do now will think of it. If I or a loved one is having surgery, I'm probably going to mention like, hey, when's your birthday? And I'll jokingly mention that there was this article. But if it is
I'm
their
sure
birthday,
the surgeon will love that.
Yeah. And then we reviewed 2 papers from pediatrics, one on newborn infectious disease risks from alternative perinatal practices, and one on vitamin K for newborns. The bottom line for newborn infectious disease risk in alternative practices was that there were no benefits seen for vaginal seeding of kids who are delivered by C-section. Again, that's taking vaginal secretions and just dripping them on the baby,
right,
so they get the benefit of presumably their microbiome. There's also no benefit for water births in the second stage of birth or at delivery. That's often done to help calm the mom. And maybe in the beginning it's okay, but there's too many risks from infection. There's also no benefits for something called umbilical non-severance, or the Lotus birth. That's when you do not cut the umbilical cord following a birth, and you go home with the placenta attached to the baby until it naturally falls off in 3 to 10 days. And all I have to say to that is, ew. Matt's making this face like, ew.
I would say yuckity yuck.
And there's no medical indication or advantage for eating a placenta.
Double yuckity yuck.
All these practices can have significant infection risks. Have you ever had anybody ask about bringing the placenta home?
Neither.
So I got to tell this story. Maybe 2 years ago I said it was already, but my retired partner, Joe DeSanto, had a mom who came in and said, we want to do a Lotus birth. She explained it. She knitted a little placenta holder that was lavender scented. And she said, I'm going to carry the placenta in this. And Joe listened and he smiled and he said, I don't think we're the right practice for you. And he nicely, I don't know where they ended up, but
goodness gracious,
that is out there.
Yeah. So interestingly, delaying the first newborn bath can have benefits, which enhance success in breastfeeding, unless the mom has HIV or HSV or HPV or hepatitis C, in which case there's some risk involved.
A lot of H's.
Yeah, lots of H's there. Speaking of hepatitis, deferral of the initial hepatitis B vaccine is definitely not recommended, since it's a critical safety net to the risk of a baby contracting hepatitis B. If somehow the mom's hepatitis B screening was falsely negative, or if she had not seroconverted at the time of testing, but did later in the pregnancy, or for that matter, if she didn't have the screening done at all, So in these cases, administration of hepatitis B vaccine to a baby at birth will reduce the baby's risk of contracting hepatitis B by 90%. Pretty impressive. And we know, Rob, that of the cases of hepatitis B, and we have Dr. Offit to thank for this kind of information in one of the first books that he published. In the case of hepatitis B in children, a full 25% of kids who contract hepatitis B, there's no obvious source for. So this continues to be just really mysterious and disturbing, especially because the outcome in kids with hepatitis B, it's bad enough for adults, but for kids, it's dramatically, like logarithmically worse.
Right. So we really need to
Yeah.
push that they should get the hepatitis B
Yeah.
in their first day.
So there are about 2 million Americans with chronic hepatitis B. We both see new parents who refuse the hepatitis B vaccine for their babies at birth, and then we have this discussion. Often these families also refuse ocular erythromycin ointment that's routinely administered at birth as well.
Right, but it was a bit of a shocker to me that ocular erythromycin, which is used proactively to prevent newborn eye infections of gonorrhea called gonococcal ophthalmia neonatorum, is not recommended by the Canadian Medical Society and in other parts of the world. So, it's those Canadians again. The stance of Canada and these countries is that ocular erythromycin does not help against chlamydia. It could potentially increase antibiotic resistance, and that GC newborn eye disease is rare, infection is rare, and that there are effective treatments for it. It should be noted that in the countries that don't do it, and have eliminated this erythromycin at birth, they have not had any increases in eye infections or in blindness. And the AP seems to agree with this point. But in 2009, the USPSTF reaffirmed the administration should be kept mandatory by law. So for me, and I didn't know this until I read this article, the bottom line is if a parent refuses the ocular erythromycin, I'm not going to argue it too much. I'm going to make sure that they had a gonorrhea screen and that it was negative on mom, and just tell them to seek medical attention if there's an eye infection or eye discharge, and just leave it at that. So a lot different than refusing something like the hepatitis B, or else we'll get to the vitamin K.
Yeah, so the scariest new trend in parental refusal of routine newborn treatments, which both of us believe is really dangerous, is parental refusal of the recommended vitamin K shot at birth. Not getting the shot increases the rate of late onset vitamin K deficiency bleeding by 81 times. So goodness gracious, it's not just double, it's 81 times worse. And the bleeding that occurs is often in the brain. Oral vitamin K, which some parents will say, well, I'll just go with the oral, is not recommended at all, and it's not the equivalent of the IM or intramuscular dose. We really should stand on our heads to encourage our new parents to have their baby get the vitamin K shot. Well, time to switch gears, get to some dermatology after the break, and we will be right back.
We are back. So first we will cover information that Dr. Oza shared on atopic dermatitis. We covered eczema a few years ago, and excuse any repetition, but he had some really great tips here. And first of all, family history in many things, and especially in skin diseases, is important when looking at the risk of significant eczema in a child. A child is more likely to have persistent atopic dermatitis if both parents had eczema, and it's more likely that a child's eczema will be persistent if they started with the eczema during infancy and they still have it after age 4. The concept that eczema is triggered by certain foods is way overblown. Please, please, please do not order screening food allergy panels ever. There's also no role for food empiric elimination diets in the attempt to address eczema. Instead, encourage children to eat all the healthy foods and keep all different types of foods in the diet if they have eczema. I would say if your child has eczema, it means you should go out of your way to have much more different foods.
I think Dr. Oza made that point.
Another good point is that eczema in darker skinned individuals, and for my practice, especially African American kids, can be missed or underestimated, since the darker pigmented skin may not appear to be red or as obviously irritated. Sometimes it just looks like kinified or very thickened, and you can really underestimate how bad the eczema is if you're not realizing that.
Yeah. Moisturizing regularly is the key to treating atopic dermatitis. Ointments are generally best, but are often not preferred by older children and by the adults that put them on younger children who don't really care for the greasiness factor. So creams are often the choice. If a child and or a family is willing to use an ointment, though, Vaseline's a great choice. It's incredibly cheap and effective. Dr. Oza encourages families to use it liberally, says even go to the dollar store and pick some up, right? And prefers it to much more expensive brand moisturizers. It's best to moisturize at least twice a day. Optimally, one of these times should be just after a short bath or shower within minutes of finishing if the child's bathed every day or at the times that they are. In a child with specific hot spots, often in places like the antecubital elbow, so the area right in front of the elbow, or behind the knees, which is the popliteal fossa, and even if one is able to improve these areas, they are not truly normal afterwards. For these sites, Dr. Oza suggests considering the use of prophylactic therapy with a topical steroid for 2 days a week, or with a nonsteroidal topical 3 days a week in order to prevent flare-ups.
The phenomenon of skin thinning from topical steroid use in kids is really, really not commonplace, and it's usually not a big deal, and it's reversible. For most younger children with eczema, topical steroids are actually restorative for the skin. You want to use enough of the medicine so that the skin actually glistens. Matt, your skin is glistening today also.
I'm glowing.
You are. You're glowing. Maybe it's the floating. I don't know.
Oh, I didn't tell you. You're gonna be an uncle.
What? So due to steroid phobia, we often do not prescribe enough topical steroids when we prescribe them. A 1 or 2 year old needs almost 9 grams to cover 10% of their body, so we need to prescribe enough of the steroids, even a tub worth. And topical steroids also can reduce Staph aureus on the skin. However, one still wants to limit its use to maybe 1 or 2 weeks at a time for flare-ups. So you do it for the flare-up and then maybe 4 or 5 days after that. And some studies show that once-a-day topical steroids can be as effective as a twice-a-day regimen if you use enough the first time. So, some specifics. He uses hydrocortisone 2.5% if it's not so severe and you're doing something more than over-the-counter. You agree with that? That's your first line?
I do, yeah.
The
Although
2.5%?
oftentimes by the time they get to us, we need to kind of
True.
step it up quicker.
And that stepping up next can be triamcinolone 0.25% for kids under 2 and triamcinolone 0.1% ointment for the over 2 for stepping up. Skin wraps can be considered if it's severe. Dr. Oza did caution that we really, really shouldn't use oral steroids for eczema, and I haven't done that in decades.
I haven't done it in years. Yeah.
Decades.
Yeah.
And non-steroidals are generally not as potent as a prescription topical steroids. So as we talked about 2 years ago, tacrolimus 0.03%, which is protopic, is a little bit stronger than pimecrolimus cream, which is Elidel. Both may work a little better than the crisaborale or Eucrisa, but this Eucrisa is approved down to age 3 months, which is sweet. Although it often,
If
in
you
my
can get it paid
experience,
for.
if you get it paid for,
Yeah.
plus it does sting a bit more.
Yeah, but it's ridiculous.
But
Most of
being
these
paid
things,
for.
even though they're generics, at least the
Right.
first two, it's still like pulling teeth to get the insurers to pay for it.
Right. And again, they're not often as effective as topical steroids, but a good alternative if you can afford it. And they also can be used in this prevention strategy.
This brings us to those with more severe eczema. For the 15% of those with atopic dermatitis who suffer from severe eczema, we no longer use things like methotrexate or ultraviolet B therapy or cyclosporin. Instead, now we have biologics, which are, as you've heard us speak about in previous episodes.
And on every TV commercial during the playoffs.
Yeah, they are the next horizon. Yep. One of these is dupilumab or Dupixent. This is an interleukin antagonist and is administered as a monthly subcutaneous injection with indications for the treatment of moderate to severe atopic dermatitis. It's approved for those 6 months of age and above. It's also used for asthma and for eosinophilic esophagitis for patients who are 12 years and older. Routine lab monitoring is not needed, which is great. Side effects include 5 to 10% risk of conjunctivitis and sometimes head and neck dermatitis. Those using Dupixent should avoid live virus vaccines while they take it. Dupixent provides substantial relief and clearance of atopic dermatitis in about 30 to 40% of kids who use it. Do you have kids who are on this, Rob?
I have one.
I have one too, and I think that he does indeed experience the head and neck dermatitis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but otherwise, it's been a tremendous boon for this guy.
And newer biologics include systemic JAK inhibitors. One is called epaticatinib, or Rinvoq, approved for those over 12 with moderate to severe eczema in a pill form. And it may even be better than the Dupixent injections, but it has a black box warning about infections, malignancy risk, heart issues. So we await more data on that. But on the horizon, and it's kind of exciting, is a topical JAK inhibitor called ruxolitinib cream, or Opzelura. It's indicated for those 12 and above. It can only be used on 20% of your surface area body at a time, and it costs over $2,000 for 60 grams, but cleared half the patients in a study in 8 weeks. So this may be a game changer with severe eczema if it gets cheaper and it's topical. There is so much research on eczema because there's a lot of money in it, and it's quite an exciting time. But again, it gets back to if we can control it early when they're babies with aggressive moisturizing and topical steroids, we could really prevent a lot of adult eczema, as well as food allergies and asthma. So it behooves us pediatric caregivers to really hit eczema hard early. And speaking of that and hitting hard, who else hits hard, Matt?
That would be our Philadelphia Eagles.
Philadelphia. What's their record, Matt?
Let me see, Rob. Let me think about that for a second. 5-0.
5-0. So is that perfect?
Pretty much as perfect as it gets, right? Because
Okay.
the O part means no losses.
It's infinity. We never lose.
That's
And
right.
Who are we playing this tomorrow? By the time you hear this, they'll
Yes.
probably get killed, but because we're Eagles fans. But who are they playing tomorrow?
That would be those hated, at least in this area,
Oh, my God.
Dallas Cowgirls.
Cowgirls. And their quarterback. Do you want your quarterback to play? The guy who's coming back from an injury?
Bring it, Dak. We're
Bring it.
ready.
We're ready.
More than
Oh,
ready.
my goodness.
In fact, both your quarterbacks can play at once because our D is stout.
It is stout. I mean, each week we win worse, more and more ugly. You went to one game.
I
you were down
did.
14-0.
Yes, the rainy game with Justin.
Oh,
yeah. I wasn't worried.
Yeah, I was worried.
Justin's a worrier. He wasn't worried.
I was worried. In the rain,
Nah,
I
we're
was
good.
worried. Jalen Hurts. I mean, it's all. And we beat Carson Wentz.
Mm-hmm. That was not. I didn't necessarily feel bad for him, but I think what was it, 11 sacks?
Oh,
I think
my
11
God.
sacks is a little brutal,
It was-
right?
it
I mean,
was-
you got to be hurting after
It was
that.
brutal. But the Cowboys beat us last year by like 3,000 points.
True,
so
true.
I
So
really
we have a
wanna
little vendetta
stick
here.
it to them. So ready?
Yep.
And
Fly, Eagles, fly on the road to victory. Fight, Eagles, fight. Score a touchdown, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Hit 'em low, hit 'em high, and watch our Eagles fly. Fly, Eagles, fly on the road to victory. Eagles, Eagles!
And that's all we got, boys and girls. See us very soon for the rest of dermatology. Good night, Moon.
Did you hear when they were interviewing fans down in Atlanta after the first?
Podcast Pediatricians Productions. All rights reserved.